Welcome. It's a little slippery on the highways this morning. This is the Subcommittee 1 of the Legislative Modernization Committee. We've been given assignment to have a couple of meetings with the focus to look at conference committee reports, amendments, and to consider the House of the Clerk, the Secretary of the Senate, the Speaker and the Majority Leader's offices. And so to that end, these assignments came out mid last week, and I've tried to pull some folks together to visit with us today. And I think it will take a different look than a typical meeting where we just do presentations. I'd like it to actually be more of a conversation. I tried to get the committee members up to speed so that we could actually hit the ground running here in terms of things that we've done in the past. So just to revisit that briefly for those that are online, you know, we started this committee last year. It was put into the House rules for the purpose of looking at things that will make us operate more efficient, effective, and transparently. We started last year with some testimony from the various areas of the legislative support. The Revisor's Office spoke to us, legislative research, House Clerk, security, and I could keep going, but we are now looking again at this particular topic. So rather than have those folks do all those presentations again, I've tried to leverage those and to bring them at least the more key points specific to our topic today, bring those forward so that we can kind of see what the status of that is. So to some extent, and when we heard testimonies from those folks, what we heard is, you know, the way things work is really up to the legislature. That's what we build in rules. So as the project, I know there's been a big project, the ks project, and we'll hear more about that. And that was a system that was implemented back in 2011 and has been continually updated. It's a key support for the legislative body. And, you know, so I'm wondering as that system was it developed just to accommodate the current way of doing business, or maybe there were conversations about doing things differently? I don't know, but some things I want to learn in our discussion today. So I do appreciate everyone being here, and I guess first I was going to ask the Revisor's Office to get up and be able to discuss with us some of the things that came out in testimony last year, and I'd just like to get a little better frame of reference because they're the office that really pulls a lot of the load when the legislature does things and wants a product turned around very quickly. They do a great job of supporting us, and as has been brought out in discussion in this committee before, you know, at the beginning of session when things are moving at a fairly reasonable pace, it's easy to keep track of. Things are posted nicely on websites. You can follow bills, but then the pace picks up a little bit, and then at the end, these conference committees come, and you know, often, you know, things will happen in conference committees, and then we go right to the floor, and it's a waiting game, of course, because the folks are working their tails off in the offices to get the product that we need to continue on. So with that background, the Revisor's Office, would you mind visiting with us? Thanks. And as always, of course, introduce yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I'm Gordon Self, Revisor of Statutes. With that, I think what I plan to do is give you a very broad overview, and then I think it's important that we hear from Eric and IT so that we get an update of the current project. And then I have Natalie here, who's our liaison on the project, that I'll ask her to speak for a few minutes after our IT department has spoken. I had a conversation, you know, with this committee last year, and we talked about kind of general overview, and I just wanted to kind of touch base on that and a couple of the things that you mentioned. You know, from our perspective in trying to draft the legal documents that carry out the process, and by that I'm talking about bills and resolutions, and then committee reports and floor amendments and conference committee reports, I always indicate that, there's different time expectations, to keep the system going. And, often bills, we have days or even weeks to meet certain time frames. The deadlines are set, and, we adhere to those deadlines. They're set by you. We follow them. They're not our deadlines, they're yours. But for bills and resolutions, it's typically days or weeks. Committee reports, as you know, committee reports, when a committee acts, there's a rule that says we have to have the committee report within 2 days from action. So we're talking 2 days for committee reports. As you know, for floor amendments are often, the GO is posted one day, and then people start to become aware of what's going to be on general orders. We start to get some requests in the office, but often our office doesn't receive the majority of our requests till the day of that the bill is on general orders. And that's often because you're busy, discussions on what's coming up the next day haven't occurred. Often coming out of your caucus meetings, we get lots of requests. Well, in Kansas, there's no time cutoff for floor amendments. So that means that you can request a floor amendment prior to, right up to, minutes before, or actually during the debate. We get a high percentage of our floor amendment requests as you're going into session at 11, or even after that you've gone into session. So from the standpoint of timing, that's an important thing to keep in mind. As an attorney, our revisors, we look at our job from the standpoint of accuracy, efficiency, and speed. And I understand how speed is very important, to legislators, to make sure that when you get us a request, the time between when you get us a request and when you have the floor amendment in your hand is as short as possible. But obviously, as attorneys, my primary concern is accuracy and of course, efficiency in the system as well. In order to ensure accuracy, there are things that, have to always be factored into it. Some floor amendments my attorneys have drafted before, they're very knowledgeable about. It flies from their brain to the paper or to the computer very fast. And other times, obviously, there may need to be some research and, thinking. And as a part of that, there is some delay, and we have to allow the attorneys to be able to do their job, because obviously, yes, it's important to be fast, but it's most important that the words that ultimately are on, being offered by you carry out the policy that you want and are accurate in that. One of our guidelines down in my office is additionally, and I instituted it when I became revisor, which was a second read in my office where one attorney is checking a second attorney's work. And then in between that, we have the proofing department that makes sure that the document actually reflects what the revisor wanted. Now, obviously, in times of exigent circumstances with timing, we're able to change that system to some extent and expedite your floor amendment to cut down on some of that time. So my point is there is that importance to have accuracy and as well as speed, let's say. The sooner we get the request, obviously the better it is for us to be able to process your request and get it ready for the time that you need it on the floor. There are states that you have to post the GO 48 hours before the bill is on GO, and then 24 hours before the bill is on GO, floor amendments are shut down. So that you have to get your floor amendment in 24 hours before the bill is on GO, which is simply for really two purposes. One, to get time, to have adequate time to be able to process all those floor amendments and have them ready when you go to the floor on that day. But also I think it also has an element for you all that has to do with potentially notice that this floor amendment's coming, so that the body can study it ahead of time possibly, and just simply for a little bit of organization. It's just the purpose of any general deadline, and not allow, you know, floor amendments on the fly. Now, there are exceptions made depending upon, you know, what happens on the floor debate. But the point is there are ways to deal, you know, with this. The two aspects of trying to improve, when we started talking about a new bill drafting system, the two aspects to try to improve efficiency and speed, for example, and yet retain the accuracy, was the actual bill drafting system itself, what improvements could be made, you know, in that system. But then secondly, we would be looking at process that really is a little bit outside of the actual bill drafting system itself, but what are the various processes that we utilize here, and what of those processes, you know, should be considered for change?
Just, if I could, just, you know, and I think as we look at the entirety of the process, when you gave your testimony previously, you said, you know, I think you would self-grade yourself, which I'm a tough self-grader myself, but respecting that, of course, you had said, I grade our performance on bill drafting as a B or B+. I would probably give you a higher score, actually, because when I'm just in a normal status, trying to get bills drafted, it's great work, quick turnaround. I get multiple versions. So that happens, but you went on to say then for conference committee reports, amendatory process, floor amendments, even floor amendments typically are, I've been one of those folks that have given you a fairly short, and that's happened too. So I think the focus and why this is kind of a topic they want us to look at is, you know, when we get to those long days at the end of session, and Representative Schreiber's, I'd love you to chime in because you've been here much longer than I have. So, but you know, there's those days that become nights. And often we break into conference committee and then we go back to the floor, or, you know, we're waiting on something. And I'm not sure exactly what all the pieces are that need to happen in those times, because of course systems get stressed. As I said, they work perfectly we got lots of time and everything's good, but that's kind of the point where everything happens in a very small window. So I guess what I'm curious of is when you self-graded yourself, you know, what's happening in that window that we as legislators don't see? We're sitting and waiting, but what's happening and what's the long straw, I guess, in that needs to be addressed? Is that a House rules issue? Is that you'd mentioned all the systems that you have and some of those problems? Can we speak specifically kind of, I think that's why this is a focus of attention. Thank you.
Sure. I appreciate that. And I'll then not really focus on the bill drafting part of this at this point, and I'll just focus on the amendatory reports. You won't have to listen to me quite as long, but I'm
just trying to move purposely through the materials.
Sure,
so we can
I appreciate
hopefully
that.
Get our
and that was, to be honest with you, that falls in line with why we approached this whole new bill drafting focus. Was not so much on the drafting of bills, but so much on how could we improve the items that I told you, you know, as I mentioned earlier, the items that we have hours or minutes, you know, to try to prepare for you. You're correct. There's really 4 levels of requirements under which we operate. And as we talk about changes in both the bill drafting system, but also you know, changes in terms of processes that we might be able to make a change in the process. Obviously, the first one is the Constitution, and the Constitution does have requirements in it about what needs to go in a bill or things like that. There are aspects, for example, when you see every bill and it says, be it enacted, that clause is required by the Constitution to be a part of a bill. So there are some constitutional requirements that obviously when we start talking about process changes, you know, we're going to follow the Constitution and we're going to make our processes, you know, adapt to that. But then there are also statutes that have requirements that have been enacted by the legislature. The best example is, you know, when you look at bills and you see different versions of the bill as amended by House committee or as amended by Senate committee of the whole, and you see the different fonts and types and bold, and that's actually in a statute. So if we were to want to make some changes to simplify that or to change that process, you know, that would require a statutory change.
Is that a problem point? You know, I guess that's what I'm trying to really start to bring down to is.
Sure. From our perspective, in terms of hurrying to get, you know, or trying to speed up the process to get you floor amendments, no, that doesn't factor into it. That's a different issue that, you know, once it gets to the printing of the bill would be more of an issue. Most of the issues that would involve trying to get floor amendments to you fall under the category of either House rules, and of course we have Senate rules, and so we have differences often between the two chambers, but House rules, and then what I call, you know, custom and precedent, which I say that, and yet custom and precedent can sometimes be a very significant factor in an analysis from the standpoint of, you know, we've always done it this way works, you know, we're arguing to keep it that way, but yet it isn't written. It isn't written as a rule or a statute. So,
what would be an example of that? I mean, I would think if it's not in the rules, I don't know what customs, if you give an example?
It's like, well, this is the way we've done things. And in terms of, I'm trying to think of a, yeah, like how many paper copies, you know, are required or something like that.
But as I look through rules, I don't, maybe it doesn't say how many copies, it just says copies must be delivered to these individuals. So, okay, so you're saying there are some, we've always done 20 copies kind of thing.
Yeah, and, you know, that's important. You know, to have some consistency is important. But I will tell you, as a part of this process, we are, meaning the revisor's office, research, the chief clerk, and our IT department, we are looking at process as well as, you know, upgrading the bill drafting system itself. And so, and both internally within the chief clerk's office or the IT department or the revisor's office, that is a part of our analysis. I'm going to have, I was going to have Eric speak about the update on the system and where we're at, and then I was going to go into some of the specifics of what we do now and what we may or may not do after the new system is developed. So I'll kind of put a hold on your question, because I think it'll fit in better, a hold on your question of going over, you know, the process.
Yeah, and I wasn't wanting to go line by line kind of thing, but you say we're looking at processes. Is that the KLIS steering team talked about process and said, okay, I see head nods back here.
Both.
But I guess I was hoping in your testimony by leading, but perhaps we'll get to it later. So, like, what are those choke points at 10 o'clock on a Thursday night when we're all, you know, pushing things quickly? You know,
yeah,
is it the number of copies? If so, we can. If it's not in rules, then that's probably a simpler change than even the rules. And of course, statutes are harder to change. But that's what I'm trying to get is where are those real choke points, constraints in the process? And
I was
then
trying to be gentle, but now that you lobbed me a softball,
right.
I'm going to hit it hard. The biggest choke point is when we get the request. That is the biggest choke point. If we get a request early, we can almost always, even with the system we have, we can almost always process it and get it to you as you walk on the floor the day your bill's on general orders. The real choke point is when we get that request. If we get that request at 8:30, I would say we can almost always get it to you when you walk on the floor. But we staff committees, so we're in committee. I do pull revisors if they have heavy floor work. I do pull them from a committee from time to time and send their backup. But where we really run into a choke point is when we're getting those requests for floor amendments at 9:30, at 10:30, or even 11. And so I would say if you were going to start with our number one choke point, it would be a process from the standpoint of when we actually get the request. Now, obviously, if we get a request that we've done before, or Natalie has drafted a version of it 22 other times, she can move that much faster than if she gets a request where she has to stop and do a little bit of research or do a little bit of thinking. And so that obviously makes a difference. And then the second thing is, one thing that you all may not be aware of, when I'm not going to tell war stories, but I think this is helpful here. When I staffed house tax a few years ago, there was a tax bill up. I was the only reviser, and I had to bring in, triage and bring in other revisers. But I received 52 requests for floor amendments on one bill. And of those 52, which, by the way, all 52 were drafted and delivered, only 16 were offered. And of those 16 that were offered, I think 8 got adopted. But the point I'm trying to make is you may not be aware of the sheer volume of the number of requests we get. So that's the number one choke point.
And that's on floor amendments, so that's a House rules sounding kind of thing. Excuse me.
I would agree. And here, let me say one other thing.
Representative Schreiber had a question,
Sure.
But go quickly.
As a reviser, I can't impose rules. Like I've had people say, can you limit so-and-so's bill request, or can you limit? We can't do that, even though we might want to. You only get 6 today. We're not able to do that. That is something that only the House can impose.
Representative Schreiber, you have a question. And others, please jump in. I want it to be a conversation.
Yeah, actually, it's kind of an affirmation of what Gordon was talking about. I know a former legislator who I think every day for every bill that came up on GO would have a pile of amendments that this person would have drafted, and that person might not offer any of them. But it was always just kind of a covering all the possible scenarios that he thought might come up. And to me, I think that's part of this issue is matching the demand to the capacity that your office has to process all of this. And if we just have you or your staff creating all these amendments that never get offered, then that's taken time away from other issues that is a big choke point, and it's just kind of, like I said, affirmation of what you've said. And it's I don't know. There's got to be either a limit on the number of amendments or time frame in which to offer them.
Well, and I appreciate that, because one of the things, as I said, what we can't do is when I receive 12 requests, I can't say good ones, not so good ones, likely to pass, likely not to pass. That's not appropriate as a nonpartisan agency for us to do that. So we need to prepare all of the floor amendments no matter what. And what that can mean at times, and no disrespect, is there could be a floor amendment that is very important to a majority of the body. Maybe it's going to get 121 votes, but we don't analyze that in terms of, well, we should put this one on the top because we're doing that analysis. So we're in a first in, first out, basis, and cranking down through the various requests, and we don't judge them from that perspective. Okay. Occasionally, the only exception, occasionally the the chairperson or the vice chairperson or even the ranking minority member of a committee will say, here's an amendment that is more technical in nature, that is more, you know, is changing something or revising something in the bill that is of a technical nature, and then we would put a priority on that one and have that one get to the floor sooner rather than later. But and let me just say one other thing, especially on the more controversial bills, the bills where there's a greater difference of opinion, we're much more likely to get more floor amendments and seemingly at the last minute. You know, if a bill is a bill that is there's a very strong consensus, and then there's a strong consensus on a certain amendment, we often get that the day before. But you all also are limited too, because you don't always know, you know, what bill is going to be up, you know, the next day. And so you may not know to come to us, or you may not have focused on it because of all the other things that you have to focus on.
So I appreciate that, and this addresses the issue of floor amendments. But I would think there's actually, the rule allows that kind of behavior to happen, I agree, but behind the scenes, your process takes a certain amount of time also. So there's probably a technical component to that the next speaker may speak to, and that's really what I wanted to understand is how much is one versus how much is the other. Because I would think even if this guy can request these things at any point, the time to produce it is a constraint of the number of folks you have, but it's also a constraint of how long the process takes for you to do even a minor change. So, and we need to go ahead and let some other, but so that's the short straw in your view, is the allowance of folks to be able to do this right up to the moment of, and any number of them, I get that, it's overwhelming to you. But so take me to the scenario where we're sitting on the floor and there's a conference committee and they just got done, and now, is that the same thing? Is that a rule, or is that technical length of time? And 2 minutes, please.
Sure. On conference committee, it is more of just simply, what did the conference committee agree to? How complicated is that? You know, how many components are there? And then additionally does it take, like I said, is it new language? Not necessarily new subject matter, but new language that the attorney has to think through. The best example is the difference between a conference committee report on a budget bill. We're talking hours, 16 hours, that it's just simply going to take to go through that process to do that. Can it be shortened? Well, that's something that we're looking at. Versus if Natalie's in a judiciary conference committee and it's a relatively simple agreement, Natalie can have that document to the committee chairperson to start the signature within hours. And so, like I said, it's a little bit difficult. There's also technical differences which we can touch base on. There are aspects of a conference committee report that are easier from a technical standpoint to draft than there are in-floor amendments.
So it's a combination of things. Representative Schreiber?
Gordon, I just wanted to be clear on when you do the amendments, you follow that same process as you would for a bill, so there's a second reader and all of that as well on the amendment?
Correct.
Okay.
Now, in the floor amendment circumstance, that is a time when we have to make decisions on can we, you know, the balance between time and accuracy. And I'll be honest with you, and we don't always make the right decisions, but there's a number of things that we change. We may skip proofing. We may skip the second read, and then it's all on the attorney. We may be in communication with Susan on we're sending this up in a different format to try to get it there and make decisions. Like we may send it up without making copies. There are decisions like that that have to be made in those circumstances. I will tell you and I want Eric to get into it, but there's aspects of the system itself of drafting where there's a document. Once the attorney knows what they want to draft, there's a document that the attorney or their secretary, you know, puts into place and puts the language on, and then that document generates what is the legal document, which is the floor amendment that you actually see. So you actually have two documents that are in play, and the success, let's say, of this initial document or the delta, the success of that and generating a committee report is an essential part of this process. If it is successful and generates the legal document well, we move much faster than if it doesn't generate the legal document well. In our current system, it is fairly common that it doesn't do as well as we would want under the time circumstances. Under the new system, that's one of the critical things that we're trying to accomplish is indeed that generation of the legal document carries a higher level of accuracy.
Okay, thank you. Representative McDonald, do you have a quick question? I wanted to get to Mr.
I do have just a newbie question. When we do a gut and go, is it pretty straightforward and quick for you to take contents and stick them in another, or is there a longer process behind the scenes for that?
I hate to always say it depends, but it really does. But a gut and go in many ways, there are times that it is quicker and more efficient than in, out, in, out, in, out, in, out. There are times where what we're doing is simply generating a document for you that says strike all of these pages and then insert in whole. Well, depending upon what you're inserting in whole, if you're inserting something that has no changes, and then there's a couple other complicated aspects to it, but if it is in the proper form, to actually gut and go and put that in a bill can be, like I said, it could be faster than some of the in, out that has to be done.
Okay, well, thank you. And as you said, you or Natalie may come back, but let's move on. I know you have a very thankless job, and I appreciate, you kind of herding the cats on that, and you provide a great service to the body. So thank you, and thank you for being here. Eric?
Good morning. I'm Eric Teal. I'm the Director of Application Services, and last Friday, the chair asked me to put together some information on the scope of the ks Modernization project that we are working on right now, or have been working on for the last nearly 2 years.
Yeah, and in fairness, thank you for that. I did, as I mentioned at the outset, I kind of pulled a lot of folks in here on short notice, so I appreciate that. And I know the project itself has gone for a while, and so my hope was to hear kind of what are the choke points, and I know you're on the steering team as well as Natalie. Kind of, there's going to be a ton of enhancements to this that some of the technical folks may appreciate more than thus folks that are on the user side. So, the experience that I'm advocating is kind of what the user experience is and the changes that would benefit that. So with that, thank you.
Well, essentially, I can sum this up in one line. We're replacing about everything that the revisor's office has. There. That's the summary pretty much of the modernization project. As I kind of stayed here a little bit, we were replacing how they request bills, how they request floor amendments, how the request for floor amendments, committee reports, bill drafts, resolutions, how those are done. They're now going to have a workflow management system built in to help streamline how a bill, resolution, all these amendments move through their processes. It'll also be more of a streamlined version with their proofing department. So there's a Pearlie and some of those down in the revisor's office will have more of a dashboard to follow how their amendments and everything that they're proofing flows through the system.
Ask a question. Yeah, so as you developed the project plan and map these processes, so I assume all the folks were at the table, the revisor's office, research, blah, 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 and you talked about this. And who was the voice of the legislature in that process? I'm curious.
Be the department heads primarily. I don't know that we had any direct input from any particular group.
Okay, I just
may be able to
curious.
weigh in on that. I know we've had conversations with the president and speaker's office at different times, but.
Gordon?
The Legislative Coordinating Council is the voice of the legislature, and both Alan's and Eric's department and the department's heads are in conversation and giving reports on the status of the project. Now, from the standpoint of, is someone sitting at the table or on the steering committee, the LCC designated the agency heads to be the steering committee, and they made that decision.
Yeah, and I guess I just wonder because, you know, to the extent rules, if there was some give and take in terms, because the LCC, of course, isn't going to sit in on daily development meetings and identifying user acceptance requirements and all the rest. But I just wonder, you know, in a conversation like that, to make a person aware and say, because you want this to happen this way, then we'll have to build the system. So the system, I'm assuming, was built to accommodate the way things are done. Is that fair? Pretty much, and
The original KLS system, yes, that's the way.
and the modifications for this phase one that will go in at the end of this year probably is built around the way we currently do business. So as was in the testimony previous, if we want to do something different, we'll have to change the rules, and then that may impact, of course, the system. But it's a cycle, I understand. Thank you.
Some of what we've changed or worked with is the various departments on their internal processes and how they would interact with the new system. The new system is built more to support those systems, as we've worked with, like Natalie and the revisor's office, and Susan and Corey were both involved in some of the conversations, but.
Okay, quickly?
I will, quickly. You're right, but at the same time, as we're going through this, there is some analysis being done on processes. One of the things that is much better this time around than the first time around in the early time we did this was the users are involved. The users of the systems from the departments, et cetera, are involved both in design and testing, et cetera. But certainly, as we go through the process, and I'll give you one example, there was an issue with, we have all kinds of, I know this sounds minute, but it's important, all kinds of different paper sizes that we use. Documents are different sizes, and that conversion from one size to the other has caused issues and slows us down. So a decision was made, you know, by the steering committee that one size paper would be at least, you know, as part of our plan would be used, which will mean in 2025 your bills will look different. They won't be the tiny bills, but the fact that that decision was made, we believe was an improvement in the system, both from efficiency and accuracy and timing. So having said that, I know the steering committee would certainly, you know, welcome any input. Right now, our input comes from the Legislative Coordinating Council, but we would certainly appreciate any input, you know, from the legislature. And honestly, if you wanted to put some legislators in the room with us as we were going through things, I'm welcome.
I don't have this on. We're having this conversation today about rules and making changes, and I'm just wondered if that kind of conversation happened in the design for the modernization that's going on currently. I'm going to guess minimal, and that's why we're here, and that's why we're doing this. But anyway, I took you off track of your list here, so
No, it's okay. I'm just here mainly to answer questions and to go over the list here. Some of the things, yeah, we're redesigning basically the whole system, like I said, including workflow management systems as well as our drafting system. We're going to go with getting away from the open office, moving to a Microsoft Word-based system, which the tools and things people are more used to using in their daily lives. Let's see, what else? Then we're doing part of this too, we're integrating some of our systems, existing systems, with the new system that we're building. That would be how we're leaving in place how bills are processed in chamber, how amendments are processed in chamber. There will be a little bit of updates to the proofing that's done that Susan's staff would do. That would be done in the new drafting tools as well. The new system is going to be more of a centralized system where everybody, like the chambers, the revisers, eventually KLRD, will have like a window into the system, or a API as they call it, place where the, each one of these clerk systems, the revisor systems all have a view into the data. Rather than we kind of have some disjoint systems now where we have to pass documents and things digitally from one department to the other, or one group to the other. As Gordon has stated, some of the issues we've had in the current system are the transformations that we have to make in the bill drafts, or the amendments, reports, and everything going up. To go from the 8.5 by 11 to the 6 by 9, we have to restyle, redo everything in the documents when we send them up and put them on the smaller form, so they still maintain the page and line number that everybody's used to. And if you mess up, if one gets messed up in one place, downstream the rest of that bill, we have little notes. So we say, well, this bill had this problem and it's probably going to have issues as we get farther down, so we can be ready to resolve those. But that's the high point here. Then we have phase 2 that we just recently was given approval to accept federal funds to pay for, which is going to cover everything else, rewriting all of legislative research, rewriting what Susan and Corey use in the chambers, and as well as looking at an appropriations workflow management system that'll handle how budget bills and appropriation bills pass between the two, between research and the revisor's office, to help automate as much of that process as we can. Then redesign of our website. That was part of phase 1, but the implementation will be coming with phase 2, as well as we're looking at like a member management system to where you as a member can track a bill you're interested in, and when it's going to be heard in a committee, what testimony, your notes. Then we're also looking to do that for staff and eventually the public as we get further down. So,
Representative Wagner, you have a...
Yeah, no. So you say as far as automate the system, that you had to re-enter data multiple times, or what do you mean automate, I guess?
or the appropriations piece.
I don't know, what you just threw in that you were, part of your changes is it would be a more new automated system. I guess, I mean, automated, it takes away what staff is entering data?
Staff would still be entering it. It's just the communication between the departments right now it's not as seamless as it could be.
Okay.
I guess is how I put that, and that's something we are looking at
Okay.
improving.
I don't know, just the word automated struck me. I didn't quite know how to interpret that.
Improve communications, I guess, between the two departments on that, or how data flows between the two departments. I see Gordon might have some input on that.
Gordon?
Yes.
Explaining this very well, sorry.
I think specifically we're talking about in the appropriation or budget process, there's close coordination between the research department and the revisor's office. And we kind of go, I'm old school here, but we kind of go off system, so to speak. There's communications that have to be made that kind of break from the system. And so we have various kind of inefficiencies from that standpoint. And what we're working on here is to have it be a complete electronic or complete system where the communications are able to go more efficiently and quickly back and forth between the research department and the revisor's office when completing budget bills and amendments and conference committee reports, et cetera.
Yeah, the budget is a whole new animal. I kind of haven't put that in scope here too much because, yeah, we get that put on our desk. It's about an inch thick, and we're going to vote on this tomorrow. But Representative Wagner.
Yeah, no, thank you again. So the KLS, this updating that's going on here, I mean, do you guys have some sort of goal as far as that, I guess us as being somewhat the end users of the results, I mean, that we'll notice something happening quicker, or it'll just be more comprehensible, or kind of, I don't know, is there any sort of, numeric, or is it's just going to be better in a general sense?
do we have any set metrics on how, like that a bill draft will get up sooner or an amendment will get sooner? No, we do not have specific metric. I mean, we'd like it to be within hours, but some of it, as Gordon had mentioned, there's some human aspects that have to be taken into account of. But we're hoping with the planning working into the new system that will, once everybody trusts the new system and that it's doing things more accurate, that some of those proofing the details, you'd be more acceptant of what's automatically generated in the document. We're hoping that would help speed up, will speed up how soon bills and amendments and conference report, committee reports and all that get up, so.
One question, and then I know you have a question. So having heard that comment, I guess I'm curious, what were the marching orders basically for this? Was it mostly just to re-platform the systems, or was there a charge to say, make it more efficient, effective, get things turned around quicker? It sounds like you're saying you're not certain, so those metrics aren't there. That's a question.
Some of those metrics are hard to determine for like a bill or a conference or amendment report. It depends, if it's a 50-page bill, it's going to take longer for the system to generate the amendment report and the actual legal terms than it does for a 3-page bill. So, is it 30 seconds a page? Is it 10 seconds a page? Gordon, I guess we had talked, I won't use your expletive about how fast you wanted it, but yes, you wanted it very fast.
All right, Representative McDonald.
This document that you've given us is really helpful. I see that phase 1 of the KLIS program will be finished in 2024. Is that what you said?
It's to go live October 31st of 2024 to be ready for the 2025 legislative session.
And then do we have a timeline on phase 2?
To be October, or be ready for the 2027
Thank you.
legislative session.
Okay. Is that it, Representative? I was going to, do you have a quick, okay. I was going to say thank you for that, and we're going to move on, but we may pull you back if we have questions.
Please do. I'm happy to meet and talk and
all right.
Show everything to the rest of the committee.
I appreciate it, and thank you again for being here on short notice and on all your work, and we appreciate it. Thank you. And what I was going to do is ask the House Clerk. I had asked her to come today, and I know it's kind of a little shift, but you have to leave at 10. I know that because she has other things to do. I'm sorry? What? Because I have session. Yes. Something important. But
a little easier, but, oh, there we go. I thought I hit the button. I was just thinking that to kind of start at the end, the question about metrics and the process. So I guess the best way I can put it is it's hard to do metrics for the legislative process and the legislative institution because we don't control it. We as staff are reactive and you aren't constant. So every 2 years or 4 years, we're changing people, we're changing leadership, we don't write the rules, we don't, the expectations are different. It's, having 165 bosses who all have very different expectations. To put metrics in as to how many bills we're going to process, well, I don't know. It depends how many people request or how many amendments or what types of things. So, I mean, it makes it really difficult, and that kind of leads into the one other comment I'll make in general. Having been here for the beginning of this project back in 2011, having been in my role since 2009 and being involved in generating it, which it was a major ground shift. We went from using WordPerfect macros and literally, I can show you how we amended bills with literally taping things on, underlining them, and sending to the printing plant, and the printing plant created all of the new versions of the bills. So in 2011, we took all of that in-house, and so between my staff and Gordon's staff and Corey's on the Senate side, creating all of that internally was a massive shift, and it's come a long way since then. And trying to think about ways we can do things better, but with the limitation of we can't tell you how to do the business, and you may change it. So when you try to code a system to do anything automatically, or, well, you guys kind of change the rules on the fly sometimes. So the system always has to be coded and designed to be able to say, well, this is the way this is always done, except if they change their minds and they want to do it differently. So you can't have, automation is somewhat limited because you have to still have some manual intervention to say, yes, this really is going this way because they haven't decided to do something different. You can't automate it like you can some processes because the legislative institution just doesn't operate like that. So that's, so just a couple of overall comments. I know that is a little outside the bounds maybe, but.
No, to your point, yeah, the metrics would just be specific to the process, not to the number of people and the number of bills. But even those, I'm sure, differ by, some things are 3 words I want to change, and some of them are, you know, the entire bill. I get that part. I'm just trying to, I think the question, I forget who asked it, maybe it was me, but it was about just, you know, we hear pain points in terms of systems communicating with other systems and having to take this and manually re-input it or copy it over. Those are the kind of things. I'm just wondering if that got fixed. But the question I had to your comments was, you know, you were on the steering committee, and you spoke in your earlier testimony about your experience within CSL. You get to see across the board a lot of institutions. Kansas is only one that has a committee of the whole, which I found was very interesting. But, you know, did some of that come into the design? I mean, did you challenge and say, you know, we could do this differently and it would take a lot of the stress off of the system and a lot of stress off of the people? I'm just wondering if that got injected into the thinking in terms of these changes.
To some extent, I would say yes. I think we're always thinking about ways we could change things. I learned a lot from my fellow clerks and secretaries around the country in different ways that, you know, they've implemented systems, you know, more electronic systems. Some are less electronic. It's all over the map. The committee of the whole is interesting. I actually just wrote an article about it for our professional journal, but it's really, that's not from a technology and a process perspective. It just really replaces something else that is called something else. It's the thing to remember when you look at other states. It's like, yeah, they don't have committee of the whole, but they're still debating bills and amending bills, or they have different timelines. The goal, I think, and doing my research, committee of the whole has been around since at least 1850, or since statehood with the rules in 1895 had committee of the whole in it. In the mid-1970s is when we changed out of having readings. I think the goal around it was to have all legislators be able to look at and amend bills under a system where you're all equal. So during committee of the whole, for instance, the speaker is not the constitution, the speaker is another member. They don't have a particular power. Under committee of the whole, you can't call the question. You can't limit debate. It's a way to have members be able to debate things without a lot of the limits. And that's a philosophy, I think. I've talked to other people from other states, and they said their chairman would be so mortally offended that anyone on the floor, that the body would dare to change their bill once it came out of their committee. They would just be aghast at the way we do it, because we're scrutinizing their work and changing things. Because the committees, if you think the committees are powerful here, they aren't nearly as powerful as they are in some other areas, so they limit debate on the floor because they don't want the committee work challenged. So there's a lot of factors that come into looking at something, thinking about why you want to change something, whether what it's called or not called. If we look at other states, you have to kind of look at what's underneath that, and it may or may not still limit you by what you want to do. You know, if you want to implement deadlines for amendments, you can certainly do that. The only thing you have to change is the rules and how you don't have to not do committee of the whole. You just have to revamp, you just have to push deadlines back or things like that. So it's, there's always an immediate reaction of kind of throwing everything out and changing it. And sometimes you can do that. Other times it doesn't have to be quite as drastic or change, but you can still get those efficiencies. The system integration is a good thing. It's kind of a little bit in silos right now. So, and that was like a data privacy thing even between divisions of the legislature when we brought up this original system. That's kind of now being done away with, so we don't have 4 different data stores of data that all have to match up and repopulate data, that we're all working out of a single one is a huge advantage, because that can cause issues depending on, well, we have to request this document from over in the revisor's side, and this code has to work, so it has to bring it over, and those kinds of things. So that's something we definitely looked at, is that if we're going to have an integrated system, it needs to be actually integrated, not just sort of on the surface, that we're all maintaining multiple versions of these data stores and different versions of the bill in different people's repositories. And what if those get out of sync? That adds a lot of complication to the current system, maintaining all of that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, you are, I mean, I wanted you to come today because I want to have you listen to the conversation and be a part of it, because most things either go through you directly or you're a close observer of how they work. And so I
They eventually
appreciate your
come
input.
through me if they're going to go anywhere else. If they sit in the revisor's office, they don't really go anywhere.
Did someone have a question for this conferee? No? All right. Well, thank you. And I think
And I'm happy to talk through things at future meetings or offline.
I think on Wednesday, if you're available, we may get into some other things and have you come back. So thank you very much. Oh, hang on.
So Susan, on the process of amendments, it's really not such a issue for your group. It's more just the revisers. I mean, you guys have to handle the paper and all that, but it really, the time crunch is the legal aspect, what the revisers have to do. Is that correct?
Well, the time crunch, yeah, the time crunch is more getting the amendment, but then there's also part of the improvements. I've always said if it starts there, the better their process is, the better our process is. Because what happens once we get that amendment, we have to incorporate it into the bill and get out the new version of the base bill, as we call it. So the better their process works, the better ours works. Ours isn't so much in the timing, other than we have to wait just like you do, and we're there also, but it's more sort of the quality of it, and how it integrates into our system and flows with, we talked about like bill size, like when we have to, every time we have to change it, if they're charts or graphs, you're going from this size paper to this. So if you have tables and graphs and everything else, we have to reformat it to get it into this smaller version. And that was part of the discussion of now going to everything being on letter size paper, is it flows better for us, and we get the new version of the bill out faster from that perspective. I don't know if that answered your question.
That was very helpful. On CCRs, of course, those are, is that, I mean, as far as your turnaround, do you guys necessarily have any problems? It's just still a question of just getting it drafted up. I mean, once you get it, it's...
Right, it's like, so the conference committee report, once that's adopted, it goes back to Gordon's office for engrossing, which means then they're going to put it into what the statutory language really is going to say. And for us, the turnaround, I have 10 days to get it to the governor once, something is adopted by both chambers. The faster the process down in the revisor's office to get me the final engrossed copy, and the more accurate that is, the easier my job is to enroll it and get it to the governor. So we feed off of it in that time, but the preparation time of it is not our issue, like I said, other than we're waiting with you. Does that answer? Is that what you?
I mean, I'm taking it from your comments that really your thing moves very quickly. It's just, there's not like a big time constraint for you to get the copies to people or get it up electronically. It's just you're just kind of waiting like the rest of us to get stuff, and then you.
Right, and we turned it around. We did a huge a change. This has now been almost 10 years ago. In terms of conference committee reports, we used to have to make copies. Well, research actually made copies, and you had to have physical copies of those they had to make like 300 copies of everything. Well, that took literally hours, especially if it was large. So we've changed the rules to allow electronic only for anything above 6 pages. And then since COVID, we've implemented, emailing things out, and things are more electronic. So that's a way we've done that. We've taken care of a lot of time delay. Actually, it goes a lot faster now than it used to. Representative Schreiber would have been here in the old days where you used to walk in and you had these stacks of papers, and literally to copy it would take research 2 hours just for the copier to copy all of it. So there have been some efficiencies that aren't electronic that are process-oriented.
Thank you. Thank you again for,
Sure.
and I appreciate you being here. Natalie, would you want to talk? Oh, Gordon? Okay.
Yeah, let me start. A couple of questions that have come up, I wanted to just add a little bit more. With regard to this, the development of the new system, to some extent, I mean, I don't want to say it's my fault, but maybe, but I would be asking for improvements. You know, we need this or we need that, and what would come back often is that, you know, that would be very difficult, or we don't know if we can do that on open office. And so the answer was like, well, if we convert to Microsoft Word, then we can do this for you, we can do that for you, and it would be far more efficient. And so from a fundamental standpoint, that was the starting point, was we needed to make this migration to Microsoft Word. And while we're doing it, hey, I got this on my list, and this on my list, and this on my list, and Susan had something on her list, and research had something on their list, and so let's try to utilize that necessity of that migration to Microsoft Word to accomplish some other things. The second thing I'll say is in terms of benefits, we are, Propylon, our vendor, has other states which they're developing bill drafting systems. We were virtually the first, maybe Pennsylvania, but we were the first like full all out way back when. But since then and now, they've had other states where they've done various things, improvements on the system. It's all, I think all their new systems are now based on Microsoft Word, and there's all these improvements that have happened. So we have, both from an IT standpoint, but also the revisor's office, we've been in, I got like all kinds of revisors' cards down in my office, and I've attended a conference where we're in communication with other states, seeing how their new systems being developed and implemented by Propylon are going. Whether there's someone that's a little bit ahead of us, like I had a long conversation with South Carolina, who is a year ahead of us, or someone that is like behind us, but we're in conversation, seeing you know, what's being developed there and what are some both system coding and other issues, but also we're learning what their processes are in terms of what their rules are and requirements, and looking at that and seeing if we can make some in-house process changes that accompany the development of the new bill drafting system. Lastly, I'll say, and I know you wanted to talk about this, and if you don't, you know, make a signal you don't, but you talked about the resolution that came in on the first day and we had a delay. And so I can talk a little bit about that. A couple things, I'll talk generally, and then I'm going to give it to Natalie because she can get very specific for you. But
Just for those, you're right, you and I talking. So the first day we were on the floor, there was a resolution, and I think there was only a 3-word floor amendment that was proposed, but we seemed to wait for a long time about that. That's what he's addressing here, and I said you might want to use that as an example of kind of what happens.
no, I appreciate it. Number one, keep in mind, if all I had to worry about was the House, my job would be easier. But I have 2 houses to worry about, the Senate. And on that particular day, the House and Senate were meeting at the exact same time, and we were getting requests for floor amendments from both senators and House members. So I love the 11 and 2:30. And, you know, when you guys don't overlap, it does make things easier for us, although sometimes we don't eat lunch because of that. But whenever you meet at the same time, it obviously doubles the trouble, so to speak. That's number one. And then number two, that resolution was introduced on the first day. Those 3-word amendments, I guarantee you my revisor had that thought out and had that ready to go. There was no research or thinking time needed. The starting point, though, is we couldn't begin to put our floor amendments into the system till one, that the resolution was actually introduced and read in. And once it's introduced and read in, and I'm going to have Natalie go over it, and feel free for Eric to jump in, there are certain things that have to happen before we can actually do the input. It's no different. A similar problem is if a committee works a bill and we do the committee report, and the committee report, we can't start working on floor amendments till the committee report is read in, and then certain things happen in the system before we can even start drafting or not drafting, but inputting those floor amendments. There are certain things that have to happen. So I'll have Natalie talk to you about what happened.
Yeah, thanks. I can start with that one. So, when a bill gets introduced, our office delivers it to you guys, you turn it into Susan. And then what happens is Susan scans that in, and then the bill packet is electronically returned to our office. Our office receives that, we unpack it, and then we do a process called netting, which is essentially getting it ready for future drafting. So when a bill, as Gordon mentioned, when a bill gets introduced, it's not really an instantaneous, we can draft an amendatory report on that bill. It has to come back down and go through some processing. That all has to happen before we can even log the request for the next step, whether that be a committee report or a floor amendment. So like Gordon said, this happens, if you want to introduce something the same day and work it the same day. It also happens really commonly with, say a committee passed out a bill and you guys want to debate it on the floor, right when you go in at 11. Well, we can't start processing any of those floor amendments until the committee report has been adopted and read into the chamber. So, that kind of obviously creates some problems. If you have questions about that, I can take those first.
No, I guess it's, does that not happen very often? I'm thinking typically like bills are out there and these things are out there. I'm just trying to think, I guess that staging typically isn't problematic because things don't happen quite that way.
It usually doesn't happen, but when it does, it's, and we do everything we can. We work with Susan in that instance. I know I've had a few issues with judiciary where we pass a bill out, so we meet at 3:30. I can easily get that committee report ready to be turned in at 11, but then word comes that you guys are actually going to advance it to general orders right after that committee report's read in. So, we try to work with Susan to see if we can kind of get an advance copy of that bill so that we can try to, go as quickly as we can once the bill is in the system.
There's probably some rules implications there. I'm just trying to think in terms of the work of this committee. Did I hear something there that maybe we need to consider in terms of changing? Representative Schreiber has a question.
Natalie, it sounds like maybe, a contributor to the delay was that it was done on the very first day of session. So really there wasn't a way for Susan to get it ahead of time to log it in, get it down to you for the netting, and then be ready for an amendment. That all had to happen that afternoon, is what it seems to me.
Yes, there is a potential had it been pre-filed. So when we work with bills that are pre-filed, those are already in our system. So
They haven't been read. I mean, Susan doesn't have those yet, does she, or does she?
She does, yeah, and they're on the website, and then, so the bill already exists, it has a number, it has, the requisite,
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So I appreciate your comments. I was back to what I think is probably what led us here is, usually in the dark of night on a Thursday, I liked how you kind of laid out, this is what has to happen. It has to be here and then it has to. So what has to happen in what sequence? And is there, as you look at the fixes that are going to go in phase one, do you have hope that something's there, or do we still have issues with constraints of rules? I'd just like your comments. Thanks.
Sure. So I will talk about kind of the nitty-gritty part a little bit of the amendment process. Now, when we say amendments, committee reports, floor amendments, and conference committee reports, while they all have some differences, they're all processed the same way in our office. So obviously with committee reports, like Gordon said, you have a little bit more time. With floor amendments, you're really under the gun. And then conference committee reports kind of fall somewhere in the middle there. But they're all treated the same and processed the same. So if I say amendatory report, that could be any one of those three.
Well, but you're, again, on that Thursday night at 11 o'clock, it's a conference committee typically that's met somewhere in the building, and now we're all waiting because then it has to hit us. I think now it hits our mailbox, and we have to have it, what, 30 minutes before? There's a number. It's an hour. Somehow, there's a certain amount of time we have to have it prior to being able to even vote on it and move it along, right? So that's when I think of conference committee, and what I think probably is the constraint that's caused this to be an issue of focus. So.
Yeah, sure. So when, in that case, how the request is going to come in is your conference committee is going to come to an agreement. So that's kind of what triggers the request, similar to if you call down for a floor amendment. That's going to be our request. So the first thing we do typically is we have to do our attorney reviser thinking, like Gordon said. So to the extent there's any new language that needs to be developed or anything like that, that's all happening on the front end. But I'll just talk about the processing of the amendment. So that comes into our office and the request is logged in our bill drafting system. You create a request for that conference committee report. And then what comes up on your screen is what we call the Delta, which is essentially just a copy of the most recent version of the bill, or in the case of a conference committee report, the version of the bill that you're using as the base, which is usually the most recent one. And so from there, we create something called an in-context amendment. So you go into that bill and you actually make your changes. You put your cursor where you need to type. You strike things that need to be stricken. If you have to import new sections, this comes up with the gut and go question a lot, because a lot of conference committee reports are gut and goes. So you have to strike all the language, and then you can import language either from, you can import a statute and manually make the changes, or you can import from a previously introduced version of a bill. So we have a little bit of functionality, usually in conference committee report time, that's what we're doing, because you're usually combining bills together or doing a gut and go, something like that. So then we have this in-context amendment, and really what that is used for is for making the new version of the bill. So if we're talking about a committee report, you know how Susan talked about, we used to cut out things and tape it on there and send it to the printing plant. This Delta has replaced that. So really our office is kind of putting together what would be printed in the packet the next day as the next version of the bill. And that's what the Delta is. But we don't really use the Delta as the conference committee report, right? So we have to get from that to the actual report. So that marked up version, we hit a button that creates, it actually generates an amendment report that has the instruction language on page 7 in line 4 by striking may and inserting shall. Now, sometimes that language is generated really well, and sometimes that language is generated not so well. So the attorney kind of has to go through and make sure that the Delta to a mandatory report conversion was done accurately. So the attorney is going to do a first pass, and then they're going to send that to our editing department. And our editing department is really going to have to do 3 things, because they're going to have to make sure that what the attorney drafted matches the amendment report. That's the legal document that you guys signed, and that's the important document. So they're going to make sure that those 2 match. But then they're also going to make sure that the amendment report matches the Delta. because the delta is going to be used to create the next version of the bill. So while it's not the legal document, it's a really important document to make sure that it's accurate. So we have to compare all 3 of those documents in the editing process, which takes more time than when we're editing our bill drafts, which is only, 1 document.
Representative Schreiber.
Natalie, it sounds like then if there's 2 or 3 conference committee reports on the same subject matter, one gets sent back to committee or whatever to the conference committee, the process starts anew all over again. It's not sequential that, oh, well, this little piece changed, so now I just have to do this. You got to go through the whole process again.
Yes, if you took action on that first conference committee report. So.
But if that was sent back.
Then, yeah, then we're starting all over again.
All over again.
Yep.
So, okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So now our editing department has kind of gone through those checks, and they may have marked something, right? You didn't get this done correctly in your amendment report, and therefore it's also not in your delta, or maybe it is in your delta, but it's wrong in your amendment report. Now the attorney has to go back and make changes to both of those documents independently, because they don't feed back to each other. So if the edit, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, this is in the current system.
Yes.
I'm curious if this is a fix in the phase, but I don't want to take you off track. But
Yeah,
we'll get back to it.
I'll kind of get into that a little bit. So if a change needs to be made, now that could come from our editing department, but that can also come from you guys. Sometimes you guys call and you say, hey, I asked for that floor amendment and I wanted it to say 5,000, but now I've talked to some people and I want it to say 7,000. So we have to go back and make that change, and we have to make sure we make it in both places, and then our editing department makes sure that we made it in both places. So that can cause some delays, obviously. You're balancing both of those documents. So as far as the project is going, I'll kind of touch on that. Our office, I think, has been very happy with the process so far. Like Gordon said, we've been very involved in the process. They've been asking us what we need, what improvements we need. As the liaison for our office, during our interim time, I meet with people from our vendor, usually 2 times a week, to go through our requirements and explain our processes, and then to design the project. So we've gotten through the design phase of the whole project. And during the last interim, we did testing on the very first piece of it, which was the request through some, like, what I would call pretty simple, basic bill drafting, importing statutes and marking them up. We haven't seen anything on amendments yet, and that's obviously where we're hoping to see the most improvement. The current design for amendments, though, is very similar to what's in our current system. So we're still going to have a delta that generates an amendment report. We're hoping that it generates a more accurate amendment report, but we still will have to balance both of those documents going forward. At least that's the current plan. And one thing we haven't really talked about is balloons, which are the amendments you guys use in committee. Right now, we do those completely outside of KLIS, and so it can be a little redundant at times. Where the current design is to bring those into the system, so they'll be made in a similar way that we make our amendment reports. And I'm hoping that will create some efficiencies when it comes to at least committee reports, because we can use that balloon language and go straight into an amendment report.
Representative White, yeah.
Just real quick. So you guys actually have an editing department? Like, you have some people that's all they do is just edit stuff? Is that what?
Yeah, it's the department in the office. It's under the editor of statutes, who I am also the editor of statutes. But also it has a number of of requirements, but the three primary, I'm sorry, are proofing. Let's just call it proofing instead of, or in addition to editing, because the attorney makes the final decision on whether to make the change. Proofing, and then the engrossing that you heard about, where we verify at the end of your action that indeed the bill, that the final bill does reflect your actions throughout the session. And then lastly, that department is also in charge of the responsibility of publication of the statute books. But the attorneys, I would be, it is not possible. I think it is way too much to give all the responsibility to one person to make sure a document, an amendatory document, is accurate, or even a bill draft is accurate. And so that's why we have our proofing department that does that. I'll stop there. I do have a comment, but.
Well, the clock kind of dictates my schedule at this point, but I don't want to stifle conversation. Did someone else have a question? I thought I saw somebody make a motion here, but so I guess Natalie, I'll call you that. I appreciate those comments, and so but as I listen to it, of course, these are all things that, according to us legislators, happen behind the curtain, right? What we see is what pops out and comes back to our desk. So, do the issues that we've talked about today in terms of those 11 o'clock on a Thursday night kind of things. I know we don't have hard metrics, but I'm getting the feel that you believe these things that are going to be implemented and ready for the next session in 2025 are going to make a big difference in terms of that experience for us that are outside the curtain. I know it's going to make a big difference behind the curtain where we don't see all the work that goes on, but I'm just curious of your comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So our hope is that these improvements will make a difference. There's really nothing we can do about the legal time, right? Like our thinking time. No process is really going to fix that. So that's kind of our base time. Like I talked about, the issue of balancing, when it comes to amendments specifically, the issue of balancing this amendment in context document with the amendment report, that's not going away. So, we're hoping to see some improvements in that conversion, but as long as we have, those two documents, there is going to be some time just to make sure that they match and that they're accurate, and there's not too much, we can do to mitigate that at times.
You had talked about it, still going to have those documents, but your work with other advisor offices, I mean, we're talking best practices. I mean, this is fairly a standard across other states. It's not something that we're doing that I would think the vendor probably would tell us, you guys are the only ones that do it this way. Is that fair? Whoops, I'm sorry. Is that fair that this is fairly best practice, typical?
It's very typical. There is a trend where some states are getting away from that. Some states are getting away from the amendment report document.
Yeah, because my hope today was to look at these things, and as you said, and what you described that goes on behind the curtain, I'll keep using that reference because I think you understand what I'm saying is we just see something that comes to our desk. We don't appreciate everything that goes on behind, but there's obviously there's human pieces to it, people sitting down, people giving thought. And as you say, those things are process related and maybe they're not going to change, but that's what that is. But then there's the system piece, which is the actual tools that you have to do that work that will greatly improve in phase one is what I'm hearing. So I was just trying to understand that process. And like I said, the degree to which these things that we experience on our side of the world at 10 o'clock on a Thursday night in early April is IT systems, or if it's House rules, or if it's some combination. That's really what my focus is today. And I know, Gordon, you have a question.
I just want to amplify what Natalie said. One of the major things I'm going to be looking at in the system. And Natalie indicated that we have not had the amendatory development in front of us to be able to test yet. When we get that, one of the things, if not the most important thing I'm going to be looking at is, does that Delta document generate a more accurate, and let's say significantly more accurate amendatory document, the legal document? If that happens, and that's a yes, then I think we can tell you we're going to be faster. If that doesn't happen, then we have to have a discussion. We have to have a discussion about, honestly, a process change. Because the biggest thing now is that Delta doesn't generate, and I mean that respectfully, doesn't generate the accurate amendatory report anywhere near to the degree that me as an attorney demands. And so if that is successful, I think we'll have made great improvements. When Natalie mentioned balloons, that's another example of something we asked for, bring it into the system, and we were told, well, we need to convert to Word in order to be able to accomplish that, you know, successfully. So that's another perfect example. And if that can be brought into the system, then that means Natalie's balloon that she brings up to committee and it's adopted by the committee, she'll be able to utilize that balloon by pressing buttons, and it will generate the report or the delta. And so those are two significant improvements that if they actually do work. I will tell you, and I appreciate the work of this group, let's say all of this goes great and we have implemented improvements. I think it is incumbent upon you to look at, from a process standpoint, some of the big picture things we talked about, imposing certain rules on legislators and the legislative process in terms of timing, timelines as to if you want to impose some timelines on when you have to turn in requests for, you already have that for bills, you've already accepted that, there's deadlines on when you can come and ask us for an individual bill. There's deadlines on when non-exempt committees can request a bill. To give some consideration to a change in the process as to putting some limits on yourself as to when you can come to us to ask for a floor amendment and relative to when the bill is up on general orders. Without that consideration, you know, there will always be time delays, people sitting on the floor because of simply when we received the request and how many requests we received. If I had received only 13 requests that day instead of 52, I'm pretty sure I'd have been faster.
Yeah, well, as I said, I think there's that piece, but then once it goes in your shop, then of course there's all the tools that you need in order to turn it around. So it's a combination of the allowance of people doing that and how long the turnaround is. And my ears kind of caught yours saying, if this all works, but of course, and you're welcome to come back up. Of course it's going to work, right? I mean, you guys have planned it very well. You've got user acceptance testing that's, I think I saw, going to get this all going. So if it was designed, then I think the assumption is hopefully that it all works. But Eric?
Yes, it's some of it, like they hinted to, it's more of once our users in all the departments they trust the system. I think we'll also see increased speed when they trust the system to generate this document correctly rather than, you know, I know attorneys and some others, even in IT, you know, you still don't trust, you have to verify. And once we get that done, I think.
And their first look will be in the acceptance testing, and I can't remember the project plan, but that's midsummer?
First one in October. Our next one with the mandatory reports and everything starts in May, right after session, May 5th to, I think is when we're.
So as they are able to actually interact with it and see, then I would think that confidence, but Gordon.
My office will be getting sneak peeks at all of these, my testing staff, and we'll use our current our test scenarios, test cases to start kicking the tires on all these systems before anybody else even sees them. So,
And I'll say one of the improvements from this go-round, from last go-round, is once we received the system, the test scripts were written in our office. And Natalie was very, very involved in that. So what we're going to be testing the new system was actually designed by my office, by the user, and will be heavily involved in testing of the system because we're the users, in addition to, of course, Eric's folks. I will tell you one thing, and this one I know you'll appreciate. I say that optimistically, but speed is so important to us to keep the process going. But my fundamental, as the reviser and as an attorney, my fundamental principle is accuracy. So we want to be able to improve, but I don't care how fast I get it. If I end up giving you something that isn't quite what you wanted, you know, or there's a mistake that carried through, that's going to be more devastating to me than you know, Representative Turner, can you wait 10 more minutes? You know, so please be aware of that. As much as we're working to try to improve speed, accuracy is our #1 fundamental principle.
Well, I appreciate that. I know the clock says it's time to wrap up. Representative McDonald, you have?
I just have a really quick thing. I want to thank Gordon for being so blunt. As the outside observer, I'm new here, but I get really frustrated watching proceedings and how everyone seems to put everything off to the last minute. And one thing that this committee could go forward and do if we chose to, is that would cost no money, is to really hammer home with leadership the importance of planning ahead so that we can all give everything in a timely manner and we're not scurrying at the end. I just think we need to use our resources and our time more effectively. And from a respect standpoint, I mean, my eyes have been opened at how much is behind this curtain. So I really do appreciate how much staff does. And I think a gesture of kindness would just be to make sure that we bring forward that message to leadership.
Yep. Yeah, and that's really what the objective of the committee is to what is that message and can we change rather than just say, sorry about that. But I think it's been a good conversation today. Did you have something else? I'm sorry, you're looking at, okay, thank you. It's a great conversation. I appreciate everybody's participation and input. It's given us some learning in terms of all the things that happen and put a little more focus, and I'd like to continue it, of course, on Wednesday. Gordon, do you have something else?
One last thing, and I appreciate your point. One of the things, though, that has helped the system, I want to make sure everyone understands, is that when we run into issues, and we know it, we often are in communication with leadership, and leadership works with us to make adjustments, you know, both from a system standpoint and to try to make things go faster. When it's impossible to do that is when we can't anticipate those kinds of things, because there are 165 of you, and neither can leadership as well. And so when we can anticipate it, I've found very cooperative working with Susan, working with Eric, and working with leadership to try to deal with problems that at least we know are coming.
It's a good team, and again, I appreciate all the work, and that we're talking about this is not an indictment of anything. It's just trying to have a conversation around something that people observe as kind of a constraint, and just what can we do to fix it, if anything. And so again, I appreciate all your time, and we'll see you on Wednesday. Thank you.